really, I think the most important response, how did it get the other bullet put back in, right? Detective Casey Young testified it was a loaded handgun, fully, the magazine, the gun was loaded. There was a bullet in the chamber and magazine fully loaded except for the bullet in the chamber, and he unloaded, took the bullet out of the chamber, took the magazine out, made the gun safe. If she shot herself in the head, there should have been one bullet missing. If he did nothing with the gun but put it back on the TV, there should have been a bullet missing. That's the thing. When you're not telling the truth, you mess up facts. Because if it didn't really happen, you can't get the facts straight. So when someone asks you a specific question about the facts, then you can't think of a quick answer because you're not talking about what really happened.
The gun was fully loaded. Magazine in, round in the chamber. Every bullet accounted for. Detective Casey Young testified to it himself. He unloaded the weapon, checked the chamber, counted what was there. And when he did, he found something that should have been impossible if Zachariah Rash was telling the truth. Not one bullet was missing. According to Zachariah Rash, his wife Crystal had reached into the center console of his Mitsubishi Eclipse on a Wisconsin highway, pulled out his loaded 9mm handgun without him noticing, placed it against the right side of her head, and pulled the trigger. He had simply kept driving, driven back to his house, carried her body to the yard, placed the gun back in its holster, left it on the television set. If that story were true, there would be one bullet missing. There wasn't. And that single fact, one round, accounted for where there should have been an absence, is the moment the entire defense collapsed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, mathematically, permanently. This is the story of how Zachariah Rash built a lie so elaborate it required him to explain away raccoons, justify 3.5 gallons of industrial sulfuric acid, and account for why he was messaging strangers on Facebook the same night he says his wife died in front of him. And it is the story of how a Wisconsin prosecutor dismantled every piece of that lie in a closing argument that the jury heard in full. We need to go back to December of 2023, because that is where this story actually begins. Crystal Rash filed for divorce. To understand what that meant, you have to understand what the prosecutor told the jury about who Crystal was in the months leading up to her death. She had retained her own attorney, a man named David Lang, representing her in her divorce, child custody, and personal injury cases. She was actively working to secure a low-income apartment. She was in regular contact with a woman named Heather Doherty.
So then you heard from Heather Doherty. She talked about how Crystal rarely missed her visits with her kids, and how on June 10th, she told her that she wasn't going to make that visit, and she sent her a picture of her son's kindergarten graduation. And this is the type of thing that Crystal would always respond to, but she did not respond to that photo. And she never heard from Crystal after that point.
Who kept her connected to her children. Her stepmother Diana reported that the last time she saw Crystal, around June 6th or 7th, it was the happiest she had ever seen her. Crystal was moving things into storage. Her father was helping her. She had recently re-established contact with her family over Christmas. She had an optimistic outlook on life, according to her attorney. She was not a woman who was giving up. She was a woman who was starting over.
To really evaluate this case is really a case of deceit and destruction of evidence. And to really evaluate this case, we have to go really back to December of 2023, when Crystal first files for that divorce. She's asserting her independence. She's taking the steps that she needs to stay in contact with her children. She's putting things into place as that divorce proceeds, to sell her house, to move into a low-income apartment. She gets attorney David Lang. So he's representing her in her divorce case, in her child custody case, and her personal injury case. Remember, he testifies about that. That last fact is really important because remember, the very last phone call that Crystal made was on June 10th, from her phone in the Adams County area, very close to that property. That was to the attorney, the Gruber law attorney that used to represent her in her civil case, but that represented her and Zach. It's possible that Zach did not know that attorney David Lang took over that civil case. And so he was having her contact the Gruber law attorney.
Zachariah Rash, according to his own statement, was fine.
So after the divorce is filed, according to Zach's statement, he says everything is fine. The divorce doesn't bother him one bit. Nothing changes. Everything, everything's the same basically. Except for his internet history tells us a different story. And some of the facts within his statement tell us a different story because we know he has to move out of the family home. We know that that is a fact. He has to move back in with his parents. And then we know starting in February of 2024, he starts researching cheating spouse in divorce. So that's on February 2nd. Then February 20th, he looks up another civil case involving him and Crystal. And then he researches and ultimately on February 20th, purchases a firearm and also starts researching silencers. Now, even in his own testimony, he says the last firearm that he owned was back in early 2000. Detectives testified they did not find any other firearms in that home.
With all of it, the divorce didn't bother him. Nothing had really changed. Everything was basically the same. His internet search history disagreed.
So, I recently had a child that finished kindergarten, and while he was in kindergarten, he got in trouble. And the teacher talked to me sort of in private, and then I went and got him, and I said, hey, heard something happen today. I want you to tell me everything about what happened, from the beginning to the end, and everything in between. And I said, don't leave out any details. And I also said, and you need to tell me the truth. Because here's the thing, when you tell me the truth, it's really easy to tell me the same story over and over again, and tell your teacher the same story over and over again. Because the truth is something that actually happened to you. The truth is something that you actually experienced. But when you lie to me, then you have to remember those lies that you told. And so when you lie to me, I can catch you in that lie, because you can't keep the lies straight between me and the teacher. Sometimes you tell me different lies than you tell the teacher. I also told my child, here's a little hint about your mom. Most of the time when I ask you a question, I already know the answer. Law enforcement is basically the same. When they conduct an interview with someone, they are prepared. They walk into that interview with facts, with information, with documents, with photos, with video surveillance, with bank statements. And then they ask the person a question, and they say, we just want the truth. And they let them talk.
This is where the prosecutor began laying the foundation that would eventually bury the defense. In a murder trial, the prosecution has to prove what the law calls premeditation, that the defendant thought about it in advance, formed a plan, made a decision before the act. The bar for proving premeditation is not how long the planning took. It can happen in seconds. But when there is documented evidence of months of planning, the prosecution's job becomes almost straightforward. Starting in February of 2024, Zachariah Rash began leaving a digital trail. February 2nd, searches for cheating spouse in divorce. February 20th, he researches a civil case involving him and Crystal. That same day, he purchases a firearm, the first he had owned in approximately 20 years. He was 42 years old. He had last owned a gun in the early 2000s. And on the same day he buys it, he begins researching silencers. February 21st, how can I disguise my voice?
Then he has searches on the 21st of February. How can I disguise my voice? February 24th, how long will fingerprints last on a plastic surface? Then he researches cameras, whether a spouse can install cameras, and whether you are allowed to install hidden cameras. Then he starts researching whether you can find someone's location on Facebook. That's the same day that he's researching about cameras and divorce. Then moving to March 30th, he goes on from researching someone's Facebook location to researching whether or not you can get someone's location through their cell phone. Clearly attempting to track somebody's location. We don't necessarily know who, but the very next day, he looks at the satellite view of 730 Main Street, his former residence and the residence where Crystal Rash is living. Then on April 4th, he goes into a lot of research on IP addresses. So now he's trying to hide his own identity, trying to figure out how law enforcement can track IP addresses, whether or not they can locate someone else, whether they can locate someone's location using their IP address, if they use a Wi-Fi hotspot, if their phone is off, if it's not accessing the internet, all of these searches. He gives some explanation on the stand. You are the ultimate individuals who are going to judge his credibility. You get to make the determination of whether or not his explanation makes sense. Just the sheer number of IP address searches on that date, the state's opinion is significant.
February 24th. How long will fingerprints last on a plastic surface? Let that sequence sit for a moment, because it is worth reading again slowly. A man who says the divorce doesn't bother him, who says everything is basically fine, is simultaneously buying a gun for the first time in 2 decades and asking the internet how long his fingerprints will survive on surfaces. The searches continue. He researches hidden cameras. He researches whether you can find someone's location through Facebook, then through a cell phone. The very next day after the cell phone tracking searches, he pulls up a satellite view of 730 Main Street, his former residence, the home where Crystal Rash is living. April 4th, he spends significant time researching IP addresses, how law enforcement tracks them, whether they can locate someone through a Wi-Fi hotspot, whether a phone being off changes what can be traced. He is, at this point, trying to understand how to hide himself from the system he is planning to need to hide from. April 8th, after his second shift work schedule has ended,
things are starting to get more significant now. We have at 12:37 a.m. So remember his work schedule. He works from 2 to 11. So 12:37 is probably after he's getting off of work. I don't know that for certain. I didn't look at April 8th to see whether or not that was a work day or not, but we know that he's sort of that, I believe that would be considered second shift, that 2 to 11 shifts. So he stays up in the early morning hours, and now he's searching at 12:37 a.m. The family law case, and then at 3:31 silencer, 3:34 home built suppressor, 3:35 how to make a suppressor, 3:37 how to make a silencer for a 9mm. Again, he gave an explanation. You're the ultimate judges of credibility. You're the ones that get to decide whether or not that explanation makes sense. But use your common sense and life experience. What does it say about a person who's researching their cheating spouse, researching finding someone's location on Facebook, researching trying to track someone's location using their cell phone, researching purchasing a 9mm, purchasing a 9mm, researching the family law case, and then a silencer? Also, we're not talking about a rifle, we're talking about a 9mm. What would you use a silencer for on a 9mm except for some type of nefarious purpose?
And it is past midnight. He searches the family law case at 12:37 a.m. Then, at 3:31 a.m., silencer. 3:34, home-built suppressor. 3:35, how to make a suppressor. 3:37, how to make a silencer for a 9mm. This is no longer background noise. This is a man, in the early hours of the morning, actively researching how to silence the specific caliber of weapon he just purchased. April 12th, he checks the family law case.
Now we see at 5:10 p.m. he visits the family law case, and then later that evening, can a person feel when they are dying? At this point, the defendant's thoughts are on display via his internet searches. This is what we call planning, premeditation. He's thinking out what he wants to do with his wife. Now we move into May. Remember his own testimony that they were up in Adams County in May. So he searches where to get ammunition in Adams County. Then on May 28th, searching, gunshot wound to the head. This is planning, premeditation. Now we have gone to just thinking about it to really developing a plan. How am I going to shoot her in the head to make it quick and a fast death? Gunshot wounds to the chest.
Again at 5:10 p.m. Later that same evening, can a person feel when they are dying? May 28th, gunshot wound to the head. Shortly after, gunshot wounds to the chest. And then, June 6th, 5 days before Crystal Rash is killed.
June 6th. 5 days. 5 days before Crystal dies. How long can you get widow's benefits? Can you get widow's benefits if taxes were never filed? 11:26 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. Again, I know that the defendant said, I was looking for Brenda. There's no evidence that the two of them were even together, that Crystal and Zach were even together on June 6th. And after Brenda's been living there for 2 years now, all of a sudden he's making these searches. There's no evidence that he ever searched this information before on behalf of Brenda. This is about him and Crystal. He's not a widow yet, but he's about to make himself a widow, and he's looking to see if he can benefit financially from that.
At 11:26 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., how long can you get widow's benefits? Can you get widow's benefits if taxes were never filed? He is not yet a widower, but he is researching what he will collect when he is. Now, here is the question I want you to sit with, because the answer the defense offered at trial is something you should weigh carefully. Zachariah Rash testified that the gunshot wound searches were about suicide, that he was so devastated by the prospect of losing his children that he was contemplating ending his own life.
It is the kind of explanation that might generate some sympathy, if it weren't for one thing. On June 10th, one day before Crystal died, he called a social worker named Miss Gordon and told her he was going to terminate his parental rights voluntarily. And on June 17th, 6 days after Crystal's death, he walked into court and did exactly that. He had seen his children exactly once since the legal proceedings began. This is not a portrait of a man destroyed by the thought of losing his kids. And the jury was asked to decide, using their own common sense and life experience, whether it made more sense for a man in that position.
The defendant gets up on the stand and says that he was thinking about committing suicide because after 5 years of not seeing his kids, he's so distraught about losing them. But remember the testimony from the social worker, Miss Gordon. The defendant called on June 10th and said he was going to terminate his parental rights. And then on June 17th, 6 days after Crystal dies, he goes into court and terminates his parental rights. He had only seen his children one time since proceedings were initiated. This is not some man who is agonizing over the loss of his children. This is someone who is planning the death of his wife.
To be researching gunshot wounds to calculate how quickly he himself might die, or how quickly someone else would. We are now roughly at the midpoint of what the jury heard, and it is important to remind you, we have not yet reached the murder itself. Everything so far has been the architecture of what came before, the planning, the preparation, the digital record of a mind moving toward an act. What comes next is where that architecture meets the physical evidence, and where the story Zachariah Rash told begins to fall apart in ways that cannot be explained away. On June 8th, surveillance footage captured Crystal Rash walking down her driveway at 11:40 a.m. It is the last time she is seen alive in Clemon, Wisconsin. Zachariah Rash, according to his account, picks her up at a nearby church. She was careful, the prosecutor noted, to avoid her mother knowing Zach was involved. The vehicle is tracked moving toward the Adams County area.
And it's likely that Zach does in fact pick her up in the church parking lot sometime around noon, but that video surveillance at 11:40 a.m. from her house is the last time that Crystal is seen alive in Clemon, Wisconsin. That's June 8th. Now, we then see the vehicle traveling up on Flock to the Adams County area on June 8th. We see lots of Flock hits on June 9th. Nothing on June 10th, but likely still in the Adams County area, Wisconsin Dells area. And then in the evening of June 10th, 11:49 p.m., again, that same time period where he's making all of his other searches, he's Googling child custody attorneys in the Milwaukee area. June 11th, he Googles at 10:41 a.m. How to get to Milwaukee without interstates. And then June 11th at 11:18 a.m., I guess that coyote search. Will a 9mm kill an animal if shot to the head? He says coyote. I say planning, confirming what he should do.
Where they spend several days. Flock camera data, automatic license plate readers, in plain English, places the vehicle in the area through June 9th and into June 10th. On the morning of June 11th, 2024, he searches how to get to Milwaukee without interstates. At 11:18 a.m., he searches again. Will a 9mm kill an animal if shot to the head? He later tells investigators this search was about coyotes. At 10:27 a.m., Surveillance footage at a Culver's restaurant shows Crystal and Zachariah together, purchasing drinks. She is wearing a Wisconsin Dells sweatshirt. He pays with his card. Later that morning, they are captured on camera at a Goodwill store in Oconomowoc. That Goodwill footage is the last time Crystal Rash is seen alive. Ever.
Then we have the Goodwill footage. This footage here, right here, June 11th, 2024, that is the last time that Crystal Rash is seen alive. Walking out of Goodwill, thrifting, one of her favorite things to do, with her estranged husband, Zachariah Rash. We then know that she gets to the back of that vehicle. She changes her shirt, he says, standing outside, and that's probably correct. I don't have anything to disagree with that, but there's an indication that she's changing her shirt. We actually find that Goodwill tag and the sweatshirt in the back seat. Now, of note, remember all of those pictures from Trevor, I believe it's in the lead, how you say his last name. No blood in the back seat. No blood in the driver's side. Only blood in the passenger side seat.
According to Zachariah Rash's account of what happened next, Crystal changed her shirt in the parking lot. They drove toward Milwaukee, visited law offices, and then drove back north on Highway M. He says it was quiet in the car.
So then we have the defendant's version of events. So he's driving up, it's silent in the car, they're listening to the radio, can't remember which station, and sometime on Highway M, after they get out of Watertown, he doesn't see her reach into the console, even though he's sitting there driving, center console's right next to his left arm. He doesn't know when she reaches in, doesn't know when she gets the gun, doesn't know when she takes the gun out of the holster, but at some point she's got the gun on her lap, doesn't say anything, and then puts it up to her right side, pulls the trigger, and then he just doesn't know what to do. He just keeps driving. He keeps driving there on Highway M, drives back to his house, gets to his house, just stands there, pulls her body out, puts it in the grass, takes the gun, puts it back in the holster, the gun that just put a bullet in her head and killed her, but has no blood on it, her hand that has no blood on it, even though the vehicle is so saturated with blood that when he cleans it with that Hoover vacuum cleaner, that the crime lab can still find the defendant's DNA both on the lip of the vacuum cleaner and in the actual hose, even though there's water and detergent flushing through both of those items. That's how saturated with blood that vehicle is, but no.
They were listening to the radio, though he cannot remember which station. And then, without him noticing, despite the center console being directly adjacent to his left arm, Crystal reached in, retrieved his loaded handgun from its holster, placed it to the right side of her head, and shot herself. He kept driving. He drove all the way home. He carried her out of the car, placed her body in the grass, took the gun, put it back in its holster, set it on the TV, and then he burned her body.
So now let's talk about his panic. So he burns this body in 4 hours. His body covered with flesh and fats and thick bone that Dr. Jordan Carson, the anthropologist, testified that the bone would have to be crushed. Remember, we didn't find significant thigh bone, arm bone, hands, feet, none of those things. But he burned most of the body in 4 hours, according to his testimony. So while he's in a panic, what does he do? 8:17 p.m., June 11th, his son, Zach Jr. Remember, nobody's calling the police now. Nobody knows that Crystal's missing. Have you heard from Crystal? Nope. Okay. Seems like someone in a panic to me, I guess. Then, to his daughter. So this is UTC, so 7:31 p.m., so about an hour before his son. Have you heard from Crystal? No, I have not. So now his lies that he's going to start, he's roping in his son and his daughter.
4 hours. That is his account of how long it took. Dr. Jordan Karsten, a forensic anthropologist, testified that burning a human body, flesh, fat, dense bone, to the degree described, requires substantial time and effort. The bones that were ultimately recovered and mapped told their own story. The skull showed fractures consistent with a gunshot wound. The damage was there, in the bone, preserved despite everything Zachariah Rash had done to prevent it. Now we come back to the gun. If Crystal Rash shot herself, one bullet should be missing. The magazine should show a gap. The math is simple. Detective Casey Young testified that when he examined the weapon, the gun was fully loaded. Bullet in the chamber, magazine complete. Not one round was unaccounted for. This is the moment the prosecution asked the jury to think about carefully. Not loudly, not with dramatic flair. Just, how does a fully loaded gun exist if the story is true? There is no clean answer. Because the only way that gun is fully loaded after a fatal shooting is if someone reloaded it. And the only person who touched the gun, by every account, was Zachariah Rash.
I don't know what really happened. I have no idea. I wasn't there. But the evidence tells me that there's blood on the passenger side door. There's blood on the passenger side window. There's dripping blood down the door. There's blood in the vent. Her seatbelt is still on. We know that she liked to be dropped off at the church. We know that he took her down to Milwaukee to attorneys' offices. We know that she never tried to fire her attorney. We know she was planning on following through with the divorce. So perhaps, based on the evidence, they got back to his house and he said, "Get out of the car." And she said, "No." And he said, "Get out of the car." And she said, "No. Take me back to the church. Take me back to the church. Take me back to the church." And he stood there from the passenger door and shot her in the head. And then she slumped over and bled out. And then he pulled her out and took her to the burn area. So when he repeated over and over and over again in his interview that she was at the church, that he dropped her off at the church, the reason why he kept saying that is because that's what she kept asking for at the very end. I don't know that for certain, but based on the evidence, that's possible.
And here is where the physical evidence compounds the impossibility. The vehicle was saturated with blood, saturated so completely that when Zachariah Rash cleaned it with a Hoover vacuum cleaner, flushing the hose and reservoir with water and detergent, forensic technicians still recovered his DNA from the lip of the vacuum and from inside the hose itself. The passenger seat, the door, the window, the vent, blood. But according to Zachariah Rash, the gun had no blood on it. Crystal's hand, which should have been in proximity to a weapon she just fired at her own head, had no blood on it either. In a car so saturated with blood that industrial cleaning could not fully erase it, the gun and the hand of the person allegedly holding it were somehow clean. What followed in the days after June 11th is what the prosecutor framed not as the behavior of a man in shock or grief, but as the behavior of a man executing a secondary plan: the destruction of evidence. June 11th, 8:17 p.m. Zachariah Rash messages his son. "Have you heard from Crystal?" Not "something terrible has happened." Not "I need help." Just "have you heard from her?" An hour earlier, he had sent the same message to his daughter. He is constructing in real time a narrative in which Crystal is simply missing. He does not call 911. He does not call an ambulance.
So then, in his panic, I'm so panicked. What do I do? My wife, the woman that I love, just shot herself. I'm not going to call police. I'm not going to take her to the hospital. I'm not going to call 911. I'm not going to see if she can be saved or if she's still alive. I'm going to burn her body, and then I'm going to send these messages to make it seem like, oh, she's missing. And then I'm going to take her debit card, go up, take her farmers and merchant card, pull money out of that account, and then take her Bank of Lake Mills card and pull $200 out at Quick Trip. Because I'm so panicked, I got to get my first $300 from her bank account. And then, in my panic, in the early morning hours, I'm going to send this message to Janet Brown, from all accounts a person that Mr. Rash has never met, and through the early morning hours, into the early morning hours of June 12th, it's going to say, I'm looking for a serious relationship. And you? Now, he says when he testifies, just looking for friendship. But still, even if you're only looking for friendship, when you're in a panic because your wife just killed herself, you're going to go on Facebook and start messaging complete strangers? The other things that he does at this time, he made a payment towards a Capital One credit card. He pays off his Mitsubishi Eclipse, $1,500. He starts researching the Kelley Blue Book value of his Ram because he can't drive that Eclipse anymore. It's covered in blood.
He burns her body. And then, in the early hours of June 12th, he messages a woman he has never met, a Janet Brown, and tells her he is looking for a serious relationship. At trial, he characterizes this as looking for friendship. The prosecutor's observation, delivered with notable restraint, was that going on Facebook to message strangers is a curious response for a man in a panic over his wife's death. He pays off his Mitsubishi Eclipse, $1,500, with money from Crystal's bank accounts. He researches the Kelley Blue Book value of his truck because the Eclipse is now unusable, covered in blood. He pulls the maximum ATM withdrawal, $200, the legal limit, from Crystal's accounts, repeatedly across multiple days and locations. He tells a woman on Facebook on June 20th, 9 days after Crystal dies, that he is living the single life and that she cheated on him. Nobody has reported Crystal missing to law enforcement at this point. He buys 14 bottles of industrial-strength sulfuric acid.
He starts researching cleaning supplies at Menards, Dirt Devil, portable carpet and upholstery spot cleaner. Do raccoons eat bones? I never actually heard an explanation for that search during direct. And I conveniently forgot to ask about that one. I'm going to tell you, I think we learned from Dr. Carson that unfortunately raccoons chew on bones, but they do not eat bones. I guess we don't know for certain that this was a raccoon, but a carnivore, but they could possibly dig up the bones. Next slide, please. Now on the 14th, we have him at Quick Trip, continuing to pull out more money, $200. And you heard, I believe it was Detective Lake, testify that the max amount that you could pull out of the ATM, $200. So every time he went, he pulled out the max. June 15th, Menards. Here, now, we start with Santeen drain opener, concentrated sulfuric acid. Now he's buying gloves. Now he's buying the cleaner, the spot remover, the OxyClean wipes, the air freshener, and of course, a monster, because he's got to make sure that he keeps his energy up for the task at hand. So you get to decide based on your common sense.
Drain cleaner, 3.5 gallons in total, across multiple stores on multiple days. He buys gloves, OxyClean, air fresheners, a 27-gallon storage tote.
So every time he went, he pulled out the max. June 15th, Menards. Here, now, we start with Santeen drain opener, concentrated sulfuric acid. Now he's buying gloves. Now he's buying the cleaner, the spot remover, the OxyClean wipes, the air freshener, and of course, a monster, because he's got to make sure that he keeps his energy up for the task at hand. So you get to decide based on your common sense and the jury instruction based on credibility. Does it make sense that he only burned this body for 4 hours on the 11th, or did he start burning it and realize this is not as easy as I thought, and he went and started pouring sulfuric acid on his wife? His wife, the mother of his children. June 15th now, 5:23 p.m., Harbor Freight, socket set. He never admits this, but likely to remove the seat from his Eclipse. June 16th, we have him, Blaine's Farm and Fleet, black and blue storage tote with,
Never recovered. He searches, do raccoons eat bones? He searches, do possums eat bones? He searches, can police get a warrant on Sunday in Wisconsin? He searches, how fast can police get a warrant? On June 23rd, a deputy sheriff passes the Wood Road property and notices smoke from the burn area. Zachariah Rash walks over. He says he was burning garbage. Within minutes of the deputy's departure, he searches, is sulfuric acid flammable? What happens when you add gas to sulfuric acid? Whatever was soaking in that acid, he needed it to burn faster.
Now the 23rd, 6:29 p.m. If you remember the interview, I'm not going to say the quote, but Detective Rolfs does make a quote about what might be going through his head when Deputy Kukan comes rolling up, but we'll just play this portion of the video briefly here. This is the squad camera video that we saw at the very beginning portion of the trial. So this is Wood Road coming up on his residence. He walks up, walks from the burn area. This is the Eclipse right here. So walks from the burn area, walks away, closes this, doesn't close these doors, closes this, and then walks up to the deputy. So remember, this was enhanced, and we could tell there's smoke coming from this area. Defendant says, I was just burning garbage. Based on all that I learned about Crystal, I do not think that she was garbage. She seems like a very kind woman that loves her children very much. Based on his behavior and his actions.
On June 24th, he drives the Eclipse, the car Crystal died in, up to an Adams County.
Apparently at this point, that's all he thought of her, is that she was garbage. He was burning her, mutilating her. So now, the 23rd, okay, so this, 6:29 p.m., 6:29 p.m., June 23rd. 6:42. Is sulfuric acid flammable? What happens when you add gas to sulfuric acid? So now, whatever was soaking in that sulfuric acid, he needs to start burning faster, because now he knows that Crystal has been reported missing. Now he knows that the law enforcement is looking for her, and he doesn't know whether or not that deputy noticed the fire burning or not. So at 7:14, can police get a warrant on Sunday in Wisconsin? How fast can police get a warrant?
Property that he had previously denied owning. He places a stuffed green frog in the blood-soaked passenger seat before doing so. The prosecutor did not speculate at length about why. The act speaks in a register that does not require commentary. On June 25th, he searches Wisconsin Missing Person Alert. Missing people in Wisconsin. Active missing persons near me. Shortly after, law enforcement arrives, and Zachariah Rash is interviewed. What the prosecutor told the jury about that interview applies far beyond this case. Detective Cotney walked in already knowing.
Now remember, Attorney Lang testified about her getting her low-income apartment, that she had an optimistic outlook on life, that she was working at maintaining visitation with her children. Even if she was going to lose the case, even if her rights were getting terminated, she was working on maintaining that visitation with her children. She was maintaining contact with her children. She was seeing her children. She was text messaging with Heather Doherty about her children. Heather was keeping her in the loop, and Heather had no intent to cut Crystal out of her children's life. Then you also heard from Attorney David Lang that him and Crystal had a good relationship, that she messaged him, and that he never received any correspondence from her firing her until Zach's attorney forwarded an email that was sent in the middle of the night at 1 a.m. on June 12th. And that message was actually from Zach, firing Attorney David Lang, but he sent it to the wrong email address.
The last image of her alive is walking out of a Goodwill store with her estranged husband, doing one of her favorite things. The truth, the prosecutor told the jury, is something that actually happened to you. It is something you experienced. And when you are telling the truth, you can tell the same story over and over again to anyone who asks, and it never changes. One bullet, fully loaded, right where it should not have been. That story never changes either.